All right. So here is the new way to get on here because I've been having troubles, like I said. And so I just didn't know if we were live, but we're live. So I want to talk to a lot of the people that have been coming on to this group and coming into the group have been talking about wanting to understand some symptoms of thyroid dysfunction and treatments and foods to eat. The thing is all of those topics are huge. And so when people say, I want to learn about what foods to eat with having a thyroid problem. So it's not quick and simple all the time, but I want to run through a few things that sort of cover all the bases. And if there are questions, absolutely put that in the comments, reach out to me privately, whatever you need to do, and I can answer more and get more information to you. So first of all, let's talk about what is a thyroid gland. So we talk about thyroid a lot. People have some awareness that it's something in their body, of course, but what is it? So it's a butterfly-shaped gland that sits right here in your neck, at the base of your neck, and it is small, but it controls so much of your body. And it, maybe shouldn't say control, but it kind of does. It affects every cell in your body. So when it is dysfunctional, even maybe prior to having a diagnosis of anything, you can have symptoms of chronic fatigue. You can have brain fog. You can wake up with headaches in the morning. You can just wake up and feel exhausted, like you haven't slept at all. Depression is really, really common with thyroid dysfunction, as well as anxiety. And a lot of times people go from one spectrum to, one area of the spectrum to the next. They go back and forth between anxiety and depression. I teach about that regularly. People can have, this targets women specifically because our female hormones interfere with thyroid hormone receptors in the body too. So that's why we feel terrible when you have a thyroid dysfunction. And oftentimes there's a connection between female hormone cycles as well as the thyroid dysfunction. And they're treated oftentimes separately, which shouldn't really be the case. And the thing that's the problem with this, we can have this dysfunction and a lot of these symptoms for decades before you can be sometimes diagnosed, or often when people are diagnosed, it can be decades before you actually come up with a diagnosis and then it can actually be treated. So that's the really frustrating part of it. So that TSH, which is what people say all the time, they come to me and they say, I have my TSH checked. It says it's normal. They say it's normal. There's nothing to see here, but they have all the symptoms and more, the things that I just talked about. And that TSH is quote unquote normal. But the problem is there is an optimal range and then there is the normal range. And the normal range is quite large. And most times people fit into a smaller range to feel their best. So that's absolutely something that needs to be addressed and dealt with. And I can give you some insight into that in a little bit. But when we have thyroid dysfunction, another sign that can come up if you can get it tested is thyroid antibodies. If you have thyroid antibodies that are popping up and no one's addressing them, which again, I've seen this many, many times, it's just sort of pushed under the rug. That is something that is dysfunction. And by the time you actually get treated for it, there's been so much damage done to the thyroid gland that oftentimes your numbers go crazy, your symptoms go even worse. And then a lot of times what's recommended is an ablation or surgery to remove it. And so we don't want to have to go down that road because I've done it and it's not fun at all. So if you have thyroid antibodies, this is part of what we'll be talking about here a little bit, is if you have thyroid antibodies, you have an autoimmune condition. And there's two antibodies that they primarily look at, antithyroid globulin and thyroid peroxidase. So it's TPO antibodies. It's how it's looked on or how it's written on your test results if you get it tested. But Hashimoto's, that's the autoimmune condition most commonly associated with thyroid. There is also Graves' disease, but Hashimoto's accounts for 90% of all hypothyroid cases. And so it's something that is very, very prevalent. And if it's not tested, or when it is tested and if it's not addressed properly, then you can just keep going down that road where you end up by damaging your thyroid gland even further. And so let's just distinguish between what happens in autoimmunity. So our immune system is designed to obviously protect ourselves from, protect our body from foreign substances. But when you have an autoimmune condition, that's when your immune system is basically trying to protect itself from itself. It goes kind of out of whack and it gets a little bit overreactive, so it will actually attack your own tissue. So when you have Hashimoto's, your body is attacking your own thyroid gland. When you have something like rheumatoid arthritis, for example, your immune system is attacking your joints. If you have colitis, your immune system is attacking your colon. So that is what's happening with an autoimmune condition. And when you have one, you are very likely to end up with one or two more. I mean, I have worked with people that have 4 of them. And it's like, if one isn't really taken care of, which sometimes it starts with Hashimoto's because it's overlooked, the things aren't tested that need to be tested, and then that ends up by causing all kinds of symptoms. And then in the midst of that, other symptoms crop up, and you end up with celiac disease. Maybe you end up with arthritis or lupus, and that's so common. Unfortunately, it takes time, and autoimmune diseases, it seems like, are really hard to get diagnosed, and it takes a while to do that. And it's just, I don't know, it's just something that needs to be addressed, and through testing and getting the right tests done. So that's that. That's what the thyroid does, and that's what it is, and that's what happens when there's dysfunction. And so it's really important to have all that figured out and pay attention to your symptoms. Find a practitioner that will, get the right numbers for you, and so you at least have a place to start with. So if you need help with that, let me know. I can either help you myself with certain parts of that, or I can direct you on to someone who can do the prescribing and do the other tests that I would be able to do. All right, so let's talk about food. So foods that are not good for thyroid. So there's so much research on foods to stay away from with thyroid, and there's sort of generalizations, but I'm just going to give you sort of the big 3 or 4 things to stay away from. So gluten, number 1, especially if you have antibodies to your thyroid, gluten, it just puts you at risk for more inflammation. Autoimmune diseases are an inflammatory response, essentially. So if you are struggling with antibodies, you need to be off gluten 100%. So whether you have celiac disease or not, or if you think you might be gluten intolerant or sensitive to gluten or whatever, you need to be off of it if you have antibodies, for sure. And it just causes an increase in the attack on your thyroid tissue. And so that is why it's important to stay away from gluten, because of something called molecular mimicry. If you followed me at all, you know that we've talked about this before. So gluten, thyroid, not a good combination. Soy as well. It's very, very inflammatory, and it's just indicated in, you can look at study after study showing that soy is just not good for thyroid function at all. So when I'm working with people and they have a thyroid condition, especially an autoimmune thyroid condition, and they're drinking soy milk instead of cow's milk, it's like they're doing one, it's not one is better than the other for them. So, and I would probably say soy for sure to be off of that. And it's in everything. That's what's really hard about soy, is that if you're eating processed foods on a regular basis at all, even just little amounts of it, chances are it's full of soy, because it is a cheap filler in lots of different things. So pay attention to that on your labels. And then artificial sweeteners, they attack the thyroid, especially Sucralose, which is the name brand of that is Splenda. So be careful with that if you have a thyroid condition or are concerned about your autoimmune, your antibody numbers, if you have that information, because it can actually be very detrimental to you. So that would be one of the toughest things for me with diet sodas and stuff. But I don't do Splenda or sucralose. So then the next thing we always hear with thyroid disease, should I have cruciferous vegetables or goitrogens? So there's a lot of information back and forth with that. And so that's going to be like your broccoli, kale, cauliflower, that type of thing. Those are such good foods for so many reasons. They have so many good chemicals in them that help flush out toxins and that type of thing, and lots of fiber, just lots of good micronutrients and antioxidants are so good for us and our thyroid. But if you have a goiter, if you have autoimmune disease, what the recommendations are is to avoid eating more than 2 cups of fresh raw vegetables in that category, the goitrogenic or the cruciferous vegetables. Don't do more than 2 cups raw per day. Now, I look at a lot of people's food journals and I don't really see that. So that's really not much of a concern. If you steam them lightly, if you're roasting them, that's a whole different story. If you're eating a raw, salad or something with a lot of those things cut up in it, if you have a goiter, if you have antibodies, that's something just to be aware of, but it's not the first thing that I think of with, people, because most people aren't eating those kind of vegetables. It's sort of that, what's the trade-off there? So what I would suggest is if you start, deciding to eat more of those types of foods more regularly, just check your numbers, check what your medications, if you're on thyroid medication, check those along the way and pay attention if maybe those foods are affecting the absorption of your thyroid hormone. So those are the 4 things just off the top of my head that kind of are in all the literature to just be aware of. The thing that I feel like, not that it's not important, but I think the least of all the concerns of that would be the cruciferous vegetables, because there's so many other benefits to them. Unless, like I said, you have a goiter or you're having some major problems, those are not the vegetables I would start eating to become healthier. All right, so then what foods are good to eat? Some simple things. Brazil nuts. I work with people with their micronutrient testing, and if they're deficient in something called selenium, it's a mineral. If they add some Brazil nuts, and sometimes they're in a multivitamin, multi-mineral supplement as well, selenium will be in there as well. That really goes a long way to getting their uptake of selenium in their body, which helps them convert the thyroid hormone. So the thyroid hormone is converted from T4 to T3, and selenium is a part of that process. And in addition, if you have zinc in your diet, good amounts of zinc, so grass-fed beef, nuts and seeds and that type of thing, leafy greens, you're going to increase your zinc intake as well. And so that also helps absorb and boost your absorption of selenium. So they work together. That's how nature works. With all your nutrients, everything works together and helps one another. So that's really, really important to do. So the other thing is making sure you're getting good amounts of magnesium. If you supplement with it, make sure it's a good absorbable form, like a glycinate form. A malate form is pretty decent too from what I've seen. And some people have some GI discomfort with certain forms. Do not use magnesium oxide. That will cause you digestive upset for sure. Plus, it just doesn't absorb properly. But what magnesium does, and pumpkin seeds are a really good source of magnesium, so sprinkle them on salads or something like that. It's a good easy way to add some magnesium in your food. But what magnesium does is it improves your sensitivity to thyroid hormone. So we have all these receptors throughout our whole body to take in the hormone that's produced by our thyroid and our liver and converted by our liver. So what happens is if you have blocked receptors from, being toxic with the foods you're eating and, processed foods and alcohol and, artificial sweeteners and all that kind of thing, and birth control hormones and other types of hormones, things like that. If those receptors are blocked, we need to get rid of that. We need to open that up, and magnesium helps with opening up those thyroid receptors and making your body more sensitive to the thyroid hormone that is available to you. So that's oftentimes the problem with the medications that we're taking. So we talked about just thyroid in general, and then we're talking about foods to avoid and then foods to add in. And then now I'm going to switch to meds a little bit. And this is something that people have asked me if I'm able to prescribe, and I can't prescribe. I am not a doctor. But what I do is when I look at people's numbers and they come in and I compare it and use that information to help guide my nutrition protocols and plans for people. And I can make recommendations to go back to their doctors or make referrals to other practitioners who maybe will look at things a little bit differently and maybe prescribe a little differently based on the information that we pull together. So most of the medication that is prescribed for thyroid hormone in this country is Synthroid, or the generic version is levothyroxine, and that is a T4 only medication. So then your thyroid gland and your liver have to go through the process of converting it from T4 to T3, which is your active thyroid hormone. So there is another medication called Cytomel that is a T3, or liothyronine, that is the generic form of it. I don't honestly know if there's another version of Cytomel. I know there is of Synthroid, other T4 medications. I'm not sure if there's another T3 medications, but it's something that is very helpful for a lot of people, myself included. My doctor has told me that about 10% of his patients need added T3 to their treatment. And then there's also natural, or I should say they're not completely natural. They made it by pharmaceutical companies, but it's more of a natural component, natural thyroid hormone that it has T4, T3, T2, and T1 in it all together, which is found in nature. So some people don't do well on synthetic thyroid hormones. That's where I've actually felt the best, but you have to kind of check it out and you have to monitor your numbers and know what's optimum for you and not just fit into that broad normal range. You need to go by symptoms a lot. So those are the medications that most people take. And the thing I want to touch on here too is some supplements for thyroid are important especially if you have deficiencies, especially when you have known deficiencies. And I don't like to just throw, it's like just throwing something at the wall hoping it sticks. When you say, oh, you could take this for this and that for that. And, it's just kind of, you're guessing, you don't really know. And that's why I love to do this micronutrient testing that I do with people. You get black and white information at the cellular level about what the person's nutrient status is. So therefore, you can give a very specific targeted protocol that matches up their deficiencies with their symptoms. And that's where things come together and people start turning over a new leaf with their symptoms, and they start to feel better than they have for years and years and years. So one of the reason I don't like to just throw stuff at people, and there's some things where it's okay to do, but if you're looking at a whole treatment plan for nutrition with someone's whole situation, all of their health conditions, it's not, I don't think, very ethical or responsible for me to do that. So you have to know the information. And part of the reason is a lot of people, especially if you have antibodies, thyroid antibodies, and you take a thyroid supplement that has iodine in it, people don't always do well. In fact, they might feel better right away, and then they start feeling worse. So iodine is not something I like to see. And I've had a few people recently come to me saying that, they have antibodies, they have Hashimoto's, and someone put them or recommended they take this supplement with iodine, or actually I've had people take separate iodine and their symptoms just went way worse. So I can't see, let's see if I can see the question. I have a question I'd like to message you if possible. Absolutely, go ahead and do that. I can't see who is on or see anybody who's on right now. So that's the other thing I have to figure out with this. But so yeah, absolutely. Go ahead and message me whenever you can, and I will answer you for sure. So just talk about some supplements. And again, it's all very specific. So I don't want, the things that I say for you just run out and randomly buy these supplements, but I'm talking about supplemental nutrition that could help boost symptoms if you know kind of where you're going and what you're doing with it. So like I talked about zinc and selenium, you can supplement those, but the best case scenario is if you get those in supplements and if you're getting the good quality kind, they're typically produced in a synergistic way. So those nutrients are together in the right ratios. And so zinc and selenium are often in even like a multivitamin, usually in the right ratio. Sometimes in certain cases, people need a little extra boost. Maybe they're so deficient that they need more zinc than what you can get in a multi. So sometimes we add something onto that, just, depends on the situation. And so, but the goal is always to use foods to enhance that and to make that better, so that the supplements aren't something you take forever. That's not the goal. Again, I talked about magnesium. That is so important to improve the thyroid receptor sensitivity. And so magnesium is used, I think it's utilized in over 300 or 350 biochemical reactions in the body. It's crazy how much it's utilized, and so many people are deficient in it because so many people are eating a really high sugar diet, and magnesium is used to process sugars like crazy. And so just that alone can set us back with magnesium. The other thing that is really important, and I see this because people they complain of brain fog and poor memory and like short recall long recall. It takes them a long time to come up with someone's name, or they just can't get their thoughts out. And so there's that sort of brain dysfunction that happens with people with a thyroid condition or thyroid dysfunction. And there's a nutrient called inositol. And inositol is something utilized by the liver. It's really important in liver health, but it's not, I should say that it's not just used by the liver, but it is important in liver health, but also in brain health. And I see when people are low in inositol and they have these symptoms, and then we work with that and improving that. You can supplement with it, but you can eat eggs and that type of thing if you're not sensitive to eggs. And that helps a lot is with helping with those brain symptoms. And apparently I'm having some right now, the brain fog, the recall, and that type of thing. And so it's really important because it helps to get your nervous system working, and your nervous system and your immune system all together, work together. Your immune system starts in your gut and all that kind of thing. It's very important for your processing of information and your thyroid health as well, and liver health. So that brings me, when I talk about the liver, so I'm kind of stuck on that, is that detoxification is so important. And that's why like my most comprehensive program incorporates both detoxification, nutrient testing, looking at your deficiencies and getting that all together, because you can't always just do one little thing at a time. It's usually like a process, and there's a method behind it to get the most, the best improvement in symptoms and get the most out of the programs. But if you are bogged down and you're not getting thyroid hormone to your thyroid receptors and all the tissues that need that thyroid hormone, a lot of times it's because you're not detoxing properly. So if you have poor gut health, if you have been, I don't care if you've been on birth control, if it was 20 years ago when you were on it, or 30 years ago when you were on it, it could have blocked your thyroid receptors. If you have poor nutrition, if you have good nutrition or relatively good nutrition and you're not absorbing it because you have poor gut health, your nutrient panel can come back pretty low, like not very healthy. And so I see it all over the place. People who eat really well and they still have a ton of deficiencies because they're not absorbing properly. And if you are having GI issues, you are probably not detoxifying very well. It's something that our liver does every second of every day, and our liver has to convert that thyroid hormone. If you are not detoxifying properly, regularly, you're just not going to be healthy. So it's just this whole process, and it's probably sounds very overwhelming, but it's something that if you know the right steps and what you should do, what you need to do to get to the next level, it's not that bad. So I work with people with this all the time. But that's what I wanted to show here, because people have been asking questions, like I said, as they're joining the group. They, you know, what foods do I eat? What supplements do I take? What medications can I do? What kind of testing should I do? And this is getting to be 25 minutes long now. I probably won't go into testing right this minute, but I'm just going to see what the question is. Do you have a test for the nutrient panel? Absolutely. Yes, I have a test for the nutrient panel, and it's amazing. So if you want to get more information on that, go ahead and message me, or I can answer more in here in the comments. I can do that. But it looks at 35 vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, amino acids. It's the cellular level nutrients, so it's much different than a serum or plasma test. It's what's in your cells and available to your body to do the work it needs. And so many times we see where deficiencies they connect the dots with people's symptoms. So I've said that many times now in different ways, but that's sort of the baseline of it. But even so, there's things that show us that no wonder you are chronically fatigued, because you don't have the nutrients to cause like the energy cycles to work in your body. And then we touch on that. And again, supplements can be, and sometimes are, a lot of times are a part of that, but it's absolutely not the only thing, because we need to use food. You can't just supplement yourself to health. You absolutely need to do that to replenish where your deficiencies lie, but you absolutely need to use the foods to get those nutrients over time. So you can't just, like I said, you can't just supplement yourself back to health. You need to put a good plan into play for the nutrition as well. So hopefully this has been helpful. It's a lot of information. I can totally geek out about all this stuff, and I could probably talk about it for another hour or so, but I won't. It's a lot right now. But so we went over what is the thyroid, what does it do, what kind of symptoms happen when there's a dysfunction. We talked about what foods in general to avoid, what nutrients and foods to include, and then, some things that you can look at with regard to medications and supplements. So if you have any other questions, please reach out. If you, like I said, I can't see who is asking the question, so I apologize. It just says Facebook user from what I can see right now. So if you have other questions, please private message me, list in the comments. I'd love to help you out. So, all right, hope you are doing well. Thank you. Bye-bye.